Hi, this is Libby Lehman, your guest host again on Name That Stitch. Can you guess which stitch this is? If the straight stitch is salt, this one would be pepper. It's the one that lives right next to the straight stitch on most machines. It's the Zig Zag stitch. So far these have been pretty easy. We may get harder in the future. Zig Zag adds a little spice to your stitching. You wouldn't piece with your Zig Zag, but you could certainly use it for couching and you could use it for decorative stitching. But I want to show you one of my favorite uses, and that is to make a satin stitch. Now some machines, the Viking in particular, doesn't allow you to make a short enough stitch length for a satin stitch, which is basically what a satin stitch is, your zigzag stitch and a short stitch length. But what they do have is a decorative stitch called the satin stitch. So you may have to hunt a little on your machine to find this. Most of the other machines, it's going to simply be your zigzag stitch with a short stitch length. How short? Somewhere between 0.3 and 0.1. I have my machine set up on my zigzag stitch, but in order to make it a satin stitch, I'm going to have to turn my stitch length down to 0.3 to 0.1. Let's do it at 0.25. How about that? You can do whatever width you want. I'm going to just leave it, well, let's go with a 4. And I'll show you the stitching. When the stitches are close together, it's going to give you a very smooth, satiny type line. The stitch length will depend on your thread. This is a decorative thread. I'm going to go wider so that you can really see this. I happen to be using a 40 weight polyester, and you really get a nice satin stitch. Let me raise this so you can see it. Oh, isn't that beautiful? I'm using actually a Superior Rainbows thread here, and I love the variegated look that you get. Now you can use this for a lot of things. I use it in covering up the edge of an applique sometimes, and one of this is while you're sewing, you can change the width. So as I sew, I'm changing the width. I can go to a width of 0, and on this machine I can go all the way out to 9. Another thing I want to show you about this is what's called a padded satin stitch. If you want it to look really nice and smooth, let's say I want a satin stitch 9 millimeters wide. I'm going to do the first one at about 8.5, 8.5, and I'm going to do it at, let's say, 6. So I'm going to make my first run of stitching. And once I've done that, let's turn it around. Can you see it really looks like more of a zigzag? It's not real filled in, but here's the magic. For the second pass, I'm going to increase my width to 9, and I'm going to take my stitch length down to 0.3, and I'm going to sew over the stitching I just did. By increasing the width a little bit, I'm not hitting in exactly the same spot, so you don't get like a traffic jam, but it just fills it in so beautifully. And there's the padded satin stitch. Really nice and smooth. Now I'm going to go to my board and I'll show you some more things that you can do with the satin stitch. One of my favorite parts of teaching is how much I learned from my students. And this was actually an idea that a student in Canada did on her quilt. And I thought this was so great, I couldn't wait to get home and try it. If you'll come in close, if you stitch first a row of satin stitching in one color, choose a different color and a decorative stitch, and stitch the decorative stitch down the top of your satin stitching, you get almost a braid-like effect. I love this. Here again, solid line of satin stitching, decorative stitch. This happens to be on my Bernina, on my 200 to 830 to 780, it is stitch 711. If you are on the 400 440, for example, it's 155. Most machines have some kind of, I call it a star or an asterisk stitch. And here you can see it stitched down on top. I just love this idea, and the possibilities are endless. Now I want to show you using this in a quilt. Here is a quilt I did using the circular attachment. And I had done some applique on this. Underneath this satin stitching is a raw edge and a straight stitch, but look how beautiful it is when I cover it up with the padded satin stitch. Remember, this is where I stitched around it once with more of a zigzag stitch, widened it by 0.5 millimeters, and came back again. I love the look of this. It just looks like you have poured the thread on top. So I hope you'll try some of this using your satin stitch on your machine. And I'll see you next time on Name That Stitch.